The light never really fades in a North Sea summer, but on July 6, 1988, the sky over Piper Alpha looked bruised. The evening shift had settled into its rhythm, compressors humming, gas lines tight, coffee cooling in the control room. Out on the grating, a tech finished checking valves, breath turning to mist in the cold wind even in July. Inside, the day crew filed their last permits. The night crew took over, and radio chatter thinned to weather, routine alarms, and a helicopter pilot signing off. 226 men were on board. The sea lay iron flat. Then a pump tripped. Piper Alpha was a cramped city stacked on steel, production modules in the center, living quarters at one end, a flare and helideck at the other. Oil and gas came in not only from Piper's own wells, but from neighbors through pipelines, Tartan, Claymore, and MCP-01. The platform had started life as an oil facility, then been reworked for gas. Walls meant to stop fire had never been designed to stop explosions. Deluge systems that should have soaked equipment with seawater at the first hint of flame were set to manual because divers were working nearby. No one wanted to drown them under a surprise torrent. The arrangement made sense until it didn't. On day shift, maintenance had begun on condensate pump A. Its pressure safety valve had been removed and sent to the workshop. In its place, a blind flange was fitted, hand-tight, a temporary cap that would hold while the job was open. A work permit warned that pump A must not be used. That document never reached the night shift control room, in a way anyone there could see when the room went hot. What the night crew knew at 9:45 p.m. was simple. Pump B had tripped and wouldn't restart. Process pressure rose. Production was life. Shutting in every line meant a cascade of flaring and lost flow that managers ashore hated to see. The panel operator and the supervisor weighed options. With B down, they decided to bring A back online. At just before 10 p.m., pump A spun up. A minute later, gas condensate leaked past the temporary blind and blew into the module as a white fog that smelled faintly sweet. Someone hit an alarm. Someone else shouted for everyone to get out. A spark, no one ever proved from where, found the cloud. The first explosion rolled through the module like a hammer in a drum. It blew out panels and lights, ripped cable trays from their mounts, and turned the quiet of the control room into a strobe of red alarms and blind blackness. The deluge system, set to manual, did nothing. The firewalls that separated equipment bays did what they were built to do, resist heat, but they were never meant for blast. They folded. Flame found pipework that had gone soft in the heat and burned through gaskets and seals. The second explosion followed as gas in another module ignited. Men ran for the lifeboats and found them unreachable, blocked by fire. Others followed drills to the accommodation block, a place the company called a refuge. On Piper, it sat above the production area, reached by enclosed stairwells. Smoke flooded those stairs fast, doors jammed in their frames. The refuge was not smoke-tight. Men pushed wet rags under thresholds and waited for orders that could no longer make it through. Down in the maze, the emergency shutdowns closed what they could reach, but Piper still had 3 long umbilicals pumping energy in from other fields. The procedures for halting import flow were slow and tangled in responsibility. Neighboring operators needed a clear instruction from Piper or the onshore control center. Radio discipline frayed. Tartan kept pumping. Claymore kept pumping. The lines fed the fire like bellows. At 10:20 p.m., a gas line ruptured and a third explosion flung metal like winter sleet. The heat pushed the air back from the platform. The sea around it boiled with falling fuel. The multi-service vessel Tharos stood to windward, a giant with firefighting monitors and a hospital bay. Her crew launched fast rescue craft into water that snapped at exposed skin. Helicopters tried to get in, but the heat column over Piper denied them the air. A standby boat moved as close as it could and waited with nets and floodlights for shapes in the water. On the platform's edge, men who could not reach lifeboats climbed down handrails or jumped. From the accommodation block, most never had that chance. They stayed put, following the rule to wait for instructions that never came. Onshore, Aberdeen's control rooms lit up. Families near the heliport stood at windows and watched a distant orange pillar burn without blinking. Offshore, radio circuits were a mix of cool voices and panic. One survivor later said the sound that cut deepest was not the blasts, but the alarms that kept trying to assert order, claxons wailing in a pattern no one could obey. Another remembered the quiet in the water once he'd cleared the glare, a dark so complete he swam toward the noise of the burning because any direction felt better than none. Shortly after 11 p.m., a 16-inch gas riser from the MCP-01 system failed. The release lit into a fireball. Steel lost strength. The drilling derrick toppled. Sections of the platform collapsed in a sequence of groans and shrieks that carried over miles. By midnight, Piper Alpha was a broken, falling scaffold with a furnace at its heart. Theros's monitors threw arcs of seawater that flashed to steam. Rescuers pulled men aboard with burned hands and eyes red from smoke and salt. A medic taped a name to each wrist with whatever details a survivor could force between coughs. At 12:45 a.m., the accommodation block, more than 100 men inside, tore loose and fell into the sea. Of the 226 on board that evening, 61 survived. 167 died. Many were never recovered. The fire burned into the next day until valves were shut on feeding lines and the structure had nothing left to give. At dawn, the smoke thinned to a brown smear over a field of twisted steel and cooling ash. What followed was as methodical as the night had been chaotic. The Cullen inquiry sat for 180 days, heard from more than 100 witnesses, and pulled on every thread it could find. The picture it drew was not of a single villain, but a chain, a permit-to-work system that lost critical information at shift change, a decision to leave the firewater pumps in manual because divers needed protection, blast-weak walls around high-risk equipment, emergency procedures that assumed time and clarity that no one had, pipeline ties that let neighboring platforms keep feeding a fire that already owned the night. Occidental Petroleum, which operated Piper Alpha, escaped criminal conviction but took the weight of the report's conclusions. The industry did too. The fixes were concrete. The United Kingdom moved from prescriptive rules to a safety case regime that forced every operator to prove, field by field, how they would control major hazards. Permit systems were rebuilt so that isolation of any critical equipment could not be missed by a tired supervisor on a hot night. Temporary refugees became real, pressurized, smoke-tight rooms with independent air and a way to command evacuation when the control room was gone. Firewalls and blast walls were redesigned for gas facilities, not the oil plant Piper had once been. Deluge systems could no longer be silently parked in manual because another job needed doing. Subsea isolation valves were added so import lines could be shut in quickly when a host went bad. Neighbor platforms signed up to common rules that let any one of them order a shutdown when the risk was obvious. Some changes were human. Drills were rewritten to account for the moment when the safest rule, shelter and wait, turns fatal. Crews were taught to fight the instinct to keep production going when alarms cascade. Families who sat through months of hearings made sure the memorial in Aberdeen's Hazelhead Park listed names and ages in stone, not on a plaque that could be moved when people forgot. No one there uses the word accident without also saying choices. Divers still pass Piper's coordinates. New platforms stand on the same sea, lit by the same long twilight. Out there, the day still tilts from routine to event at the speed of a failed seal or a missing valve. The story that men tell when they pass the memorial is simple and impossible. One missing document, a pump restarted on a bad night, a fire fed by lines that should have choked to silence, and 167 men who never came home. Everything learned since begins there. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.